There is a chair I have never been able to forget, though it is only a chair, and though the evening in which it undid me is now further behind me than I care to reckon. It stood a little apart from the great blaze of the ballroom at Storrington House, near the third window on the garden side. Half in the shadow of a marble pilaster, and for the better part of a season it had been occupied. Every evening we were at home to company, by a quiet woman whom I had known for years, and had never once troubled to see. I looked for her in that chair, late in the night, I mean to tell you of, meaning to say some idle thing to her as I had said 1,000 idle things before, and I found it empty, and the wrongness of that emptiness went through me like a draught through a shut house, and I could not then have told you why. I was 34 and a duke, and reckoned by the world a clever man, and I did not know my own heart so well as to name what ailed me. It has taken me the better part of my life to earn the humility with which I now set these things down, and I will not spare the fool I was, for he does not deserve it, and because the sparing of him would be a second injustice to her. Let me first show you the world as it was, and myself in the midst of it, so that you may measure how blind a man may be who believes himself to see everything. I was Alexander, Duke of Storrington, and I had come into the title young upon my father's death, and had worn it long enough that it fit me the way a well-made coat fits, without my thinking of it at all. I had estates in 3 counties and a house in Grosvenor Square, and a seat that the newspapers were pleased to call one of the noblest in England, and I had, besides, that particular curse of the great and the unmarried, which is to be wanted everywhere and needed nowhere. Mothers arranged their drawing-rooms about me, ministers wrote to me in confidence, young men copied the set of my neckcloth. I was busy from waking to sleeping with the business of being what I was, and I mistook that business for a life. And I mistook the deference that surrounded me for affection, and I was, in the plainest terms, a man who had never in his life been made to want for anything, and who did not therefore know the difference between what is given us and what is earned. My mother, the Dowager Duchess, kept her own establishment within the family orbit, having removed from the principal apartments upon my father's death with a grace that cost her more than she ever allowed me to see. She was a woman of considerable understanding and a shrewdness she wore lightly, as clever women learn to do, and she loved me with that clear-eyed and unillusioned love which is the rarest kind and the least comfortable, for it will not flatter. She saw a good deal more than she said. I did not know in those days how much. I supposed, as sons do, that I had long since taken her measure and had nothing further to learn of her. My sister, Lady Sophie, was but newly out that spring, a bright, warm, chattering creature of 18, all ribbons and expectation, and the ball I shall bring you to presently was got up in large part to launch her properly upon the town, that she might be seen under our own roof and our own chandeliers before the world had a chance to form any opinion of her, but the one we chose to give it. And there was Anne. I must try to set her before you as she then appeared to me, which is to say, as scarcely appearing at all, for that is the whole cruelty of the thing. Miss Anne Weston was my mother's companion, and had been so for some 5 or 6 years, since a little before my father died. She was well-born and poor, which is the unhappiest station a gentlewoman can occupy, being fine enough to feel every slight and too dependent to answer one. Her father had been a clergyman of good family and no fortune, and when he died there had been nothing for her but to make herself useful in another woman's house, and this she had done in ours, with a completeness that I took entirely for granted. She was not a beauty. I say it plainly because I said it plainly then, in my own careless mind, in the instant of dismissal by which men decide what a woman is worth to them. She was not a beauty, not an heiress, not anything the world had taught me to notice. She was of middle height and slight, with brown hair dressed simply and a pale, quiet, thoughtful face that gave nothing away and asked for nothing, and grey eyes that I had, I think, never in all those years properly looked into, so that I could not now have described their colour to you had you offered me the county of Kent to do it. She was 7 or 8 and 20. She dressed well within her means and never beyond them. She moved through our rooms as the air moves, unremarked, indispensable everywhere. For she was, in truth, the quiet engine of the whole machine of our life, though none of us called her so or thanked her for it. It was Anne who knew which of the dowagers must be seated where, and who had quarrelled with whom in the year 6, and must not be put within 10 feet of the other. It was Anne who did the flowers, and did them so that a room seemed merely to have grown pleasant of its own accord. It was Anne to whom my mother said, "Weston, my head," and Anne would draw the curtains and bring the lavender water and sit in the dimness saying nothing until the pain had passed. It was Anne who steadied Sophie when the child wept from sheer overwrought excitement the night before her presentation, and Anne who found the lost fan, and remembered the forgotten name, and smoothed the ruffled guest, and turned the awkward silence at dinner with some soft observation that set the table going again, and that no one afterward remembered she had made. She had a keen wit, kept close and shown seldom, and when she did let it out it was so gentle in its edge that the person it touched most often laughed without quite knowing he had been touched. She understood people. She understood I came to see far too late, me. And I leaned upon her day in and day out, as a man leans upon the balustrade of his own staircase, without once looking down to see what bears his weight. That is the part I cannot forgive in the man I was. It is one thing to overlook a stranger. It is another to overlook, for years together, a woman who sits at your own hearth, whose voice is among the familiar sounds of your home, to whom you say good morning and good night and 100 trifling things between, and never once, in all that time, to see her. I called her my friend, and believed it, and was even, in my dull way, fond of her, as one is fond of a good fire or a favourite room, and it never entered my head, waking or sleeping, that Anne Weston was a woman a man might love, that she had a heart which might ache, a life which might hunger, a future which the passing of every year I ignored was quietly closing about her like a door. I thought, when I thought of her at all, that she was content. It is the settled and comfortable assumption of the fortunate, that those who serve them are content. It saves so much trouble to believe it, and it flatters us besides, for it lets us fancy that our households are happy chiefly on account of our own excellence, and not on account of some patient soul who has given up her own hopes to keep them so. I have since learned that the people who ask least of us are very often the people who feel most, and that a woman may starve, year upon year, at a table heaped with everything but the one thing she wants, and never let you see her hunger, and never let me see. I took her calm for coldness of feeling, when it was in truth the discipline of a heart that had schooled itself, at whatever cost, to want nothing it could not honourably have. And there is no blindness so complete as that of the man who mistakes another for indifference, and is comfortable in the mistake. Now I will bring you to the ball, for it is time, and because everything I have been telling you was gathered up and made plain in that one night, though I did not read it until long after. We had thrown open the whole of the ground floor and the great gallery above. There were flowers, Anne's flowers, banked upon every stair. There were more wax candles burning than a poor man's family might see in a lifetime. There was music, and the shifting brilliance of 200 of the best-dressed people in England turning and murmuring and glittering under the light. Sophie was in white, flushed and radiant and frightened and entirely charming, and I danced the first 2 dances with her myself, which was thought a great condescension and was in fact the only wholly unselfish thing I did that evening. The rooms filled, the heat rose. The names announced at the head of the stairs were the names one reads in the histories. I moved among it all as I was bred to move, easy, courteous, giving each his due measure of my attention and no more, and I was aware in the pleasant idle back of my mind that everything went smoothly, that nothing failed, that the flowers did not wilt, nor the old ladies quarrel, nor the supper come late, and I did not for one instant connect this smoothness with the slight brown figure who passed and repassed at the edges of the light, seeing that it should be so. Lady Celia Danvers was there, and I danced with her, and stood with her a while by the great fireplace, and was aware of the pleasant hum of approval that our standing together sent through the room. She was the match the world had chosen for me, and I had not troubled to disagree with the world, for she was handsome and clever enough and greatly born, and it was understood on all sides, in that unspoken way in which such things are understood, that I should in my own good time put out my hand and take her, as I took most things, because they were offered, and because it was convenient. I felt no urgency about it. I felt, if I am honest, very little about it at all. That, too, is a thing I have had cause to consider since, that I could contemplate the whole future of my life, the woman who should share my table and bear my name and my children with less warmth than I gave to the choosing of a horse. And Anne, through all of it, was there and not there as she had learned to be. I saw her, in that way one sees furniture, half a dozen times across the evening. I saw her bend to hear something an old Marquis was saying, and nod, and settle a shawl more comfortably about the old woman's shoulders. I saw her draw a too-shy girl into a knot of young people and leave her there, safely launched, and slip away. I saw her exchange a look with my mother across the width of the room, one of those looks that pass between two women who have run 100 such evenings together and need no words. Once, early, she caught my eye by accident, and I gave her the small nod one gives a servant one is pleased with, and she returned it, and turned away, and I have wondered 1,000 times since what was in her face in the instant before she turned, and I shall never know, because I did not look. I never looked. That is the whole of my history with her. In the days before, written in one line, I never looked. She was in the chair by the third window when I saw her last, though I did not know it was to be the last. It was, I suppose, a little before 10. She had that stillness she kept in a crowd, the stillness of one who has made herself small on purpose, and there was about her, had I been the man to read it, something more than stillness that night, some settled quiet like the quiet that comes over a landscape when the light is going. She was watching the dancing. She was watching, I think now, me, or the place where I stood, but I cannot claim even that for certain, and I will not gild the account with things I did not see. I passed within a few feet of her, going to some duty at the far end of the room, and I believe I said something. "You are not too fatigued, Miss Weston?" or some such nothing, and I believe she answered that she was very well, and I passed on and forgot her before I had reached the door. That was the last of my old blindness. I did not know it was a last of anything. One never does. At what hour precisely she rose from that chair and gathered her shawl, and went out through the small door by the conservatory, and sent for no carriage, but walked the little way to my mother's house on the arm of no one, telling not a soul that she went, I have never been able to establish, though God knows I have gone over it. It was done as she did it, everything, quietly, without fuss, without a claim upon anyone's notice, and it was hours before it was so much remarked that she was gone. She said no farewell. She made no complaint. She simply, at about 10 o'clock, in the full blaze of the greatest night our house had seen in a decade, decided that she had had enough of the evening, of the chair, of the years in the chair, of the whole long invisible service of her heart, and she rose and she left, and she told no one. I did not then understand that this small act was the first stone drawn out of a wall, that a woman who has borne everything in silence, when she at last begins to go, goes in silence too, and that the silence is the most terrible part. For the ball went on without her, of course, splendid and untroubled, and it was near 1 in the morning, the crowd thinning, the candles guttering in their sockets, my mother tired, and the lost card tables breaking up, when it happened. I had been detained and unconscionable while by an ambassador who wished to tell me at length a thing he might have written in a sentence, and when I was free of him I turned, by pure habit, the deep unthinking habit of years, toward the third window and the chair beside the pilaster, to say to Anne some dry word about the ambassador that I knew, without thinking, she would understand and be amused by, for that was what one did, that was where one turned, when the great grinding business of the evening left a small space in which a man wished, for a moment, to be merely himself, and to be understood without effort. I turned to her chair to be understood, and the chair was empty. I cannot make you feel in the telling what I felt then, for I did not understand it myself, and a thing not understood is hard to convey. It was the most ordinary sight in the world. An empty chair at the end of a long party. 100 chairs stood empty by then, and it struck me with a force wholly out of proportion to anything reasonable. A small cold blow beneath the ribs, a sense of something wrong, that I could neither name nor argue away. I stood looking at it like a fool. I remember thinking absurdly that she had never gone before I did, that in all the years I had known her, whatever the hour, whatever the labor, Miss Weston was always still there at the last in her place, when the last guest had gone, and that her being not there now was as strange as if one of the pillars of the hall had quietly walked out into the night. I asked a footman, with a carelessness I did not feel, whether Miss Weston had retired. He believed she had gone home some hours since, Your Grace. He could not say precisely when. Some hours since. And I found that I minded this. I found that I minded it absurdly, unaccountably, past all sense, that I did not want to go back among my brilliant guests, that the great warm, glittering room had gone, somehow colder and emptier for the want of one small brown figure whom I had never in my life properly seen. I told myself it was fatigue. I told myself it was the ambassador. I told myself a dozen sensible, ducal, comfortable things, and I went and made my farewells and was charming to the last of them, and none who watched me could have guessed that anything in the world was amiss with the Duke of Storrington that night. But when the house was dark and I lay at last in my own bed, with the whole splendid successful evening behind me and Lady Celia's smile, and the ambassador's confidences and my sister's triumph all folded up and put away, the one thing I could not fold up and put away was the empty chair by the third window. It stayed with me. It sat behind my eyes in the dark, and I lay there, a man who had everything and had noticed nothing, turning it over and over and getting no nearer the bottom of it. Until the grey came up at the curtains, not yet knowing, God help me, not yet within a mile of knowing, that I had that night watched the beginning of the loss of the one thing I possessed that was worth the whole of the rest, and had felt the first faint tremor of it, and had called it nothing, and had gone into supper. To understand how a chair could undo a man, you must go back with me a little further than that night, into the years that had furnished it, for the chair was terrible to me chiefly because of all the evenings it had not been empty, and my mind, lying sleepless with the grey coming up at the curtains, went racing backward through them as a drowning man is said to see his life, only that it was not my life I saw but hers, running quietly alongside my own like a second river I had never once turned my head to look at. She had come to us in the spring of the year my father began to fail. I remember it, or rather I remember it now, having recovered it. At the time it was among the smallest events of a large and troubled season. My mother wanted a companion, someone gentle and gently born who could read aloud and manage the lesser correspondence, and be a presence in the house that was neither servant nor guest. Word came of a clergyman's daughter lately orphaned, well spoken of without means, and my mother sent for her and looked at her and kept her, and it was done. I believe I was presented to Miss Weston in the yellow drawing-room some days after her arrival, and I believe I said that I hoped she would be comfortable among us, and I have not the least recollection of her face as it was then, for I did not trouble to mark it. She was a piece of my mother's establishment, and one does not memorize the furniture of one's mother's rooms. But she took root among us with a quiet thoroughness, and within a 12-month it would have been hard to say how the house had gone on without her, save that no one said it, because the things she did were precisely the things that are never noticed until they are left undone. My father died that autumn, and it was a heavy, dragging, wretched business, the long dying of a proud man, and I was much occupied with the estate and the succession and the 1,000 grim formalities of becoming what his death made me, and it was Anne, I see now, who held the household steady underneath all that, who kept my mother from breaking, who saw that the black was ordered, and the right letters answered, and the wrong callers turned gently from the door. I noticed none of it. I was a young man suddenly made a duke, and I was full of myself and my grief and my consequence, and if I thought of Miss Weston at all in that dreadful season, I thought of her as one more of the quiet competent hands that were seeing me through it, and was no more grateful to her than I was to the banisters I gripped going up to my father's room. And then the years went on as years do, smoothing over the raw place, and Anne was simply there, a fixed feature of my mother's drawing-room and therefore of my own comings and goings, and it was in those unremarkable years that the thing grew up between us which I so wholly failed to understand. For we became friends, she and I, or what I was pleased to call friends, though I have had to learn since that the word will not stretch to cover what it was on her side, and covered only my own comfortable half of it. I fell into the habit of her. When I came to my mother's house, which was often, it was Anne I found there as often as not, and Anne with whom I talked while I waited, and I discovered by degrees that she was the easiest person in the world to talk to, and the cleverest to listen. She had a way of receiving what one said that made one wish to say the true thing rather than the showy one. The whole of my world flattered me, The men wanted my interest and the women wanted my name, and even my mother loved me too well to be always just. But Anne, from her low unregarded place, told me the truth quietly and only when it would serve and never to wound. She would say, "I think you are being a little hard on him, Your Grace. Or you have decided that already, I think, and only wish me to agree." And she was so nearly always right that I came to test my judgments against her the way a man tests a coin by its ring. Without ceremony and without ever thinking to thank the coin, we laughed at the same things, which is a bond people undervalue until they have lived without it, across a dinner table, in a room full of the correct and the dull. I had only to catch her eye to know that she had seen the absurdity I had seen, and that we were, for that instant, two conspirators in the same private mirth, and I looked for her eye at such moments as naturally as one looks for the door of a room one means to leave by. When I was vexed she calmed me, when I was low, which even the fortunate are, she knew it before I had said a word and did not press, but was somehow more present, so that the lowness passed. She asked after the things I cared for and forgot the things I did not. She was, in the plainest truth, the one person in the whole crowded theatre of my life before whom I could set down the part of Duke of Storrington and be merely a tired and fallible man, and be understood without labour, and be liked, I thought, for myself. I prized it. I will say that much for the fool I was. I did prize it in my careless fashion. I knew that my hour in my mother's drawing-room was the sweetest hour of my day, and I did not ask why. Because a man does not interrogate his own comfort, and because to ask why would have been to see. And I was very far from ready to see, for here is what I could not see, and what any woman in the room, my mother first of all, saw plainly and had seen for years, that Anne Weston loved me. She had loved me almost from the beginning. From those early heavy days when I was too sunk in my own affairs to be anything to her, but a grief-struck young man who needed steadying, and she had gone on loving me, hopelessly, through every one of the years I have been describing. While I sat in her company and warmed myself at her and called it friendship and went away, I did not read one sign of it, though the signs were everywhere, written plain, had I owned the eyes to read them. I did not read the constancy of her, the way she was always there, always turned toward wherever I was in a room as a plant turns to the light, so quietly that it looked like nothing. I did not read the small unwearied kindnesses, the book left open at the page she knew I wanted, the fire built up before I came, the note in her hand of the thing I had said I must not forget. I did not read the guarded look that came sometimes into the grey eyes, and was gone before I could have named it, had I been looking, which I was not. The look of a woman schooling her face in the very instant her heart had leapt, lest the leap be seen. She never let me see what it cost her. That was her whole art and her whole heroism, and I mistook it, of course, for the absence of any cost at all. I thought she was serene. I thought she wanted nothing. A man is very ready to believe that the woman who asks nothing of him feels nothing for him. It is so restful a belief, and it leaves him free. And into this long, unexamined ease there came, that spring, the matter of my marriage, and it is here that I did the thing for which I have never been able wholly to forgive myself, the more so because I did it in perfect innocence, which is the cruelest way of all to do a cruel thing. The world had decided that I must marry, and the world was right. A man in my position owed an heir to the name and a duchess to the house, and I was 34 and could not decently defer it much longer. And the world, having decided that I must marry, had gone on to decide whom, and had fixed upon Lady Celia Danvers, and I, as I have told you, had not troubled to disagree. She was the daughter of an old and great house, handsome in the cool, commanding way that looks well at the head of a table, accomplished, correct, and universally allowed to be the first match of her year, and it was understood in the drawing-rooms and at the clubs that the Duke of Storrington would in the course of the season pay his addresses there and be accepted, and that the two first fortunes in the county would be joined with everyone's entire approval and nobody's very great joy. I fell in with it. I danced with her and dined where she dined and let myself be seen at her side, and felt, I confess, a mild proprietary satisfaction, as at a handsome acquisition tastefully made, and I brought the whole business home to my mother's drawing-room, and laid it out before Anne. That is the part I can scarcely write, for I made Anne my confidante. Who could not see that she loved me, made her the keeper of the daily bulletin of my courtship of another woman, and I did it because it was so natural, because she was the person I told things to, because it did not so much as cross the flat, unbroken surface of my complacency that there could be any subject in the world I might not comfortably discuss with my good friend Miss Weston. I told her that I supposed I must come to the point with Lady Celia before long. I asked her, God help me, what she made of Lady Celia, whether she thought her a woman a man could be easy with. I asked Anne Weston to appraise for me the merits of my bride. I remember once, being uncertain how to word some civility to Lady Celia's formidable mother, that I said, half laughing, "You always know how to say these things, Anne. Tell me what to write." And she took the pen and told me, and the letter went and did its work, and I never saw. I spoke of Lady Celia in her hearing to my mother, weighing the settlements, the date, the house we should open. I turned to Anne in the midst of it to have her agree that the thing was well arranged. I asked her to help me smooth the path to another woman's hand, and she helped me. She helped me. She sat in her low chair with her quiet face and her steady voice, and she gave me good counsel toward my marriage to Lady Celia Danvers, counsel I could not have bettered anywhere in England, and not by one tremor, not by one falter, did she let me guess what I was doing to her, and I took it, and thanked her as one thanks a clever friend lightly, and went away pleased with my morning. I know now, as certainly as I know anything, what those weeks were to her, though I did not see a moment of it while it passed. To love a man hopelessly is one grief, and a bearable one. Women bear it every day and go on, and even find a kind of peace in the loving itself, the way one may love a thing too high to be had and be the richer for the reaching. But to love him hopelessly and be required, week upon week, smilingly, to assist him toward the arms of another, to be trusted as the dearest of friends is trusted with the whole tender business of his wooing, to be the one he turns to for the very words that will win him his bride, and to give those words, and to watch them prosper, and to keep all the while a face of serene goodwill lest by the flicker of an eyelid she betray the ruin going on within. That is a refinement of pain, I hope never to be the cause of again to any living creature, and I was the careless cause of it to the best woman I have ever known. And I did it while congratulating myself upon the ease and confidence of our friendship. It was, though neither of us called it so, the plainest possible declaration on my part. It said to her, more completely than any words of rejection could have said it, that I did not see her as a woman a man might love, that she stood so far outside the circle of that possibility, in my mind, that I could stand within her hearing and plan my whole married life to another, and never once feel the awkwardness a man feels before a woman he has thought of in that way. My very ease was the wound. My trust was the wound. There is no rejection so total as never to have been considered at all, and I served her that rejection daily, with a smile, and called it confiding in a friend. So that when I bring you again to the ball, and to the chair by the third window, and to the hour before 10 at which she rose and gathered her shawl, and went out into the dark and told no one, you will understand, as I came at last and too late to understand, what had brought her to it. It was not a sudden thing. Nothing in Anne was ever sudden. It was the quiet arrival, on a particular evening at the end of a road she had been walking a long while, of a conclusion she could no longer put off, and the evening lent itself to the conclusion, for she had spent it as she spent all our evenings in unregarded service, watching me move through the bright crowd and stand by the great fireplace with Lady Celia and send through the room that hum of approval which told her, plainer than any bells, that the thing was as good as done. She had helped to make it so. She had done the flowers for the night on which she watched me all but pledge myself to another, and she had done them beautifully. And somewhere in that long evening, sitting a little apart in the shadow of the pilaster with her hands quiet in her lap, she must have looked her whole future in the face, the years of it, the chair and the drawing-room, the watching me bring my Duchess home and my children after, the slow using up of her one life in the warming of a man who would never, though he lived to be 100, see her. And she must have decided, with that gentle finality that was the deepest thing in her, that she would not do it, that she had given enough, that a heart may serve a long apprenticeship to hope and at last, quietly, without bitterness, discharge itself and go free. And so she rose, at about 10 o'clock, and she left, and she told no one because there was no one to tell, because the one person she would have told was the very cause, and stood laughing by the fire with the woman he meant to marry. I learned of the rest of it the next morning, and I learned of it as of a small domestic matter, which is exactly how it was brought to me, and exactly the measure of how far I still was from understanding. I had risen late and heavy-eyed after my sleepless night, and had gone round to my mother's house upon some errand I have forgotten, or perhaps upon no errand but the old blind instinct, and I found my mother alone, sitting very upright at her little writing table with a look upon her face I could not at once interpret, a look grave and inward and, I thought, displeased, though not with me. I asked her what was the matter. She was silent a moment, turning a paper under her hand, and then she told me in a voice carefully level that Anne had come to her that morning early, before the house was well awake, and had given her notice. That Miss Weston meant to leave her situation, that she had spoken of a wish to be nearer some cousins in the north, and of its being time she made a change, and had said it all so quietly and so immovably that my mother, who knew her, had seen at once that it was not a thing to be argued out of, but settled, and long considered and final. She was to go within the month. I stood in the middle of my mother's warm, familiar room and heard this, and I could not for a moment make it mean anything. Anne going, Anne leaving us. It was as though someone had told me the staircase meant to leave the house. I said, foolishly, that it was very sudden, and my mother said, without looking up, that she did not think it was sudden at all, and something in the way she said it, some weight she laid on the words, made me glance at her, but her face told me nothing I could read. I asked why. I asked what had possessed the woman, whether she were unwell, whether we had in some way failed of our duty to her, and to each my mother gave a short answer or none, and let a silence fall after, and watched me in it. And I was aware, standing there, of the same wrongness I had felt the night before at the empty chair, the same cold small blow beneath the ribs, only stronger now and nearer, and I did not know it for what it was. I only knew that I did not like it, that the news sat in me like a swallowed stone, that the prospect of my mother's drawing-room without Anne in it opened before me suddenly as a cheerless and diminished place, and that I minded this, absurdly past all reason and all proportion, exactly as I had minded the chair. I told myself she was a valued servant and hard to replace, that my mother would feel the loss and must be helped to bear it. I told myself every sensible, ducal, comfortable thing, and not one of them touched the thing itself, and I went away from that house with the news lying cold in me, dismayed beyond anything I could account for, and not knowing, still not knowing, God forgive the man, what it was that I had lost, nor that I had, by my own hand and smiling, lost it. The month that lay between the giving of her notice and the going of her was, though I did not know it, the last of my long innocence, and I spent it as a man spends the last of anything does not know he is spending, carelessly, and upon the wrong things. I told myself the matter would arrange itself. I told myself that my mother would coax her out of it, or that Anne would think better of a resolution taken, as I supposed, in some passing lowness of spirits, and would let herself be persuaded to remain, for it did not occur to me, even then, that a decision of hers could be as fixed and as reasoned as a decision of mine. I had never once thought of Anne as a person with a course of her own to steer. She had been to me a fixed star, and one does not imagine the fixed stars packing their boxes. So I let the days go by, and did not go to her, and when I did go to my mother's house I contrived, without owning it to myself, to speak of everything but the one thing, as though by leaving it unmentioned I could leave it undone. But my mother, it appeared, had tried her powers and failed of them. She told me so one afternoon, briefly, with that new gravity she had worn since the morning of the notice. She had offered Anne more money, she had offered her lighter duties, a longer holiday, whatever she would name. She had come very near, she said, to begging, which was a thing my mother did to no one, and Anne had heard it all with her quiet gratitude and her quiet colour, and had not moved an inch. She would not say what had determined her. She spoke only of the cousins in the north, a clergyman's household near Ripon, respectable and glad to have her, where she might be of use and be at home. And she had thanked my mother for 8 years of kindness in words that had made my mother cry to repeat to me, and had asked, as the single favour she would take, that no more be said to press her, since it could only pain them both to no purpose. "She has decided, Alexander," my mother said, looking at me with something in her look I could not meet and could not name. "I have known her 8 years, and I have never seen her decide a thing and go back from it. You would do as well to argue with the tide." And she turned her face to the window, and I saw that she was more shaken than I had ever known her, and I laid it to the loss of a valued servant, and was sorry for her, and understood nothing. I did go to Anne once in that month, and it is the memory of all our meetings I would most gladly have back to do again. I found her in the small morning room where she did the household's writing, with her boxes not yet begun, but the drawers of her little desk standing open, and the evidences of a life being quietly dismantled laid out about her. She rose when I came in and greeted me with her usual composure, and it was a composure that I felt, for the first time in 8 years, as a thing set deliberately between us, a smooth wall with no door in it. I had come, I hardly knew why, to remonstrate, to be charming, to set the world back as it had been, and I found I could do none of it, because she gave me nothing to take hold of. I said I was very sorry to hear she meant to leave us. She said she was sensible of the goodness of the whole family, and should always be. I said the house would not be the same. She said, with the ghost of her old smile, that houses were wonderfully able to go on, and that my mother's was well ordered and would not feel it long. I said, growing almost warm, that my mother felt it already and would feel it more, and there I stopped, because I had been on the edge of saying that I felt it, and some instinct I did not examine warned me off the word. She looked at me then, one steady look out of the grey eyes, and for the space of a breath I had the sensation of standing at a door that stood, just then a little open, with something on the far side of it that I might have crossed to have known it was there. And then she said gently that she hoped I would be very happy, and she said it in a tone that closed the door and turned the key, a tone of such finished, friendly, valedictory kindness that it left me nothing to answer but a bow. She wished me joy of my marriage. She stood in the wreck of her own hopes and wished me joy of the marriage that had wrecked them, and did it so well that I went away knowing I had been wounded, only vaguely poorer and cross with myself and unable to think why. And then, upon a grey morning at the month's end, she went. I was not there. I had contrived, out of a discomfort I could not have explained, to be in town that week, so that I should not have to stand upon the steps and watch the thing happen. My mother wrote me the fact of it in a short note, that Miss Weston had gone north by the early coach, that she had taken leave of the household one by one, the servants weeping, and had asked to be remembered kindly to me. Remembered kindly to me. I read that in my rooms in London with the traffic going by under the window, and I put the note down, and I found that I could not for some minutes take up again the paper I had been reading, nor indeed do anything at all but sit, and I did not know why, and I called it fatigue, and rang for my man and dressed, and went out into the day as though nothing had happened. For nothing had happened, in the world's account and in my own. A companion had changed her situation. It is the commonest event under heaven. It was only afterward, coming back to Storrington, that I began to learn the size of what had gone. It did not come upon me all at once, nothing so merciful. It came as a slow discovery, the way a man who has lost a tooth cannot keep his tongue from the gap, and is surprised anew 100 times a day by the smooth, strange emptiness where the familiar thing had been. I went to my mother's house upon the old blind instinct, as I had gone 1,000 times, and I came into the drawing-room, and the chair by the fire was empty, and this time it was empty for good, and I knew it, and the room arranged itself about that emptiness as a face arranges itself about a missing eye. My mother sat alone. She looked older. The fire had not been built up in the way I liked, because the person who knew the way I liked it was gone. There were no flowers, or rather there were flowers sent up dutifully by the gardener and set in their bowls by a housemaid, correct and lifeless, and I understood for the first time, looking at them, that all the years I had thought my mother's rooms simply were beautiful, some hand had been making them so quietly every morning, and that the hand was in Yorkshire now, and the rooms had gone dead. It was the flowers, absurdly, that first told me. I stood looking at a bowl of them jammed anyhow into the water, and I thought Anne would never have let them stand so, and the thought was like a small cold key turning, for she was gone out of everything, and I found her everywhere by her absence. I would come upon a difficulty in the day's business, some knot in a letter or a judgment of character I was unsure of, and I would think, without willing it, that I must ask Anne, and would be halfway to my mother's house before I remembered that Anne was not there to ask. And I would stand in the road checked, feeling the loss of her counsel as a physical want, the one of a stick one has leaned on and reaches for and finds gone. I would see, across a dinner, some folly or pretension of the kind she and I had used to share in silence, and my eye would go, of its own accord, to the place where her eye should have been to meet it, and there would be no eye there, only a stranger, and the jest would die in me unshared and turn oddly to a kind of grief. I had not known how much of my daily pleasure had been, in truth, the pleasure of sharing it with her. Stripped of her, my amusements went flat, my vexations found no easing, my small triumphs went uncarried home, for she had been the one to whom I carried things. The one before whom the day was told over and thereby made real, and with her gone the days felt curiously unwitnessed, as though they happened to no one. My mother drooped. She said little, but she had lost her spring. She had leaned on Anne more than any of us, for company and for love and for the thousand small offices of a house, and without her she sat much alone and aged before my eyes, and I could not comfort her, because the comfort she wanted was the one thing neither of us would name. And it was the smallness of the missing things that undid me most, for a great loss a man may brace himself against, but there is no bracing against the 100 little offices that fall away one by one and are each of them nothing, and are together the whole warmth of a life. The book was no longer laid open at the page I wanted. The note in her clear hand no longer waited on the hall table to remind me of the thing I had said I must not forget. The callers my mother could not bear were no longer turned so gently from the door that they went away flattered. Nobody remembered how I took my tea. Nobody knew without asking that I was out of sorts, and was more present for it and made the lowness pass. These were not the graces one advertises for and hires. They had grown out of 8 years of a particular heart attending to mine, and no wage would buy them again, and I had never in 8 years said so much as thank you for one of them. And I began, in that emptied house, in those unwitnessed days, to do the thing I had refused for 8 years to do. I began to think about Anne Weston. Not as a fixed star, not as a piece of my mother's establishment, but as herself, as a woman, as the particular person who had gone. And once begun, I could not stop, and the more I thought the more monstrous grew the thing that was slowly rising in me toward the light. I remembered her face, which I had not troubled to mark on the day she came and now could not for my life stop seeing, the grey eyes, the quiet mouth, the way of tilting her head to listen. I remembered 100 moments I had walked through blind and now walked through again with my eyes open, and saw in each of them what had been there all along, the constancy, the turning toward me, the guarded leap of a look schooled instantly to stillness. I remembered her taking the pen from my hand to write my letter to Lady Celia's mother, and I saw at last, God help me, what I had been asking of her, and my whole soul turned over. And there came a night, sitting up late alone with the fire fallen to ash, when the thing I had been fending off without knowing I fended it came fully into the room and stood before me and would not be denied, and I said it to myself at last in the plainest words, as a man confesses a crime, that I loved her. That I had loved her for years without the wit to know my own heart, that the sweetest hour of my day had been her hour because she was in it, and that the friendship I had prized had been, on my side too, a love, only a love asleep, a love too proud and too blind and too sure of itself to wake. And that I had let it lie sleeping while I disposed of my hand elsewhere, and had waked to it only now in the cold, when she was 200 miles away and had wished me joy of another woman and gone. I cannot convey the disbelief with which I received my own discovery. I was the Duke of Storrington. I could have married, I told myself, with a bitterness that was half incredulity, almost any woman in England. The mothers of the kingdom had angled for me a dozen years, and I sat here undone, wrecked, hollowed out, by the loss of my mother's penniless companion. A clergyman's orphan without face or fortune enough to turn a single head at a ball, the one woman in all my world I had never once thought to look at. It was absurd. It was, by every measure I had lived my life by, impossible. And it was true. It was the truest thing I had ever known. And the more I railed at its absurdity, the more immovably it stood, until I gave over railing and simply sat with it, ashamed to the marrow. A man who had held a treasure in his hand for 8 years and called it a paperweight and set it down and lost it. I thought of all the years of her patience. I thought of what those weeks of my courtship must have been to her, that I had made her assist, and I could have wept, save that I had not the right. The tears of the man who has done the injury are an impertinence to the one who bore it. I had been given, freely and daily, the love of the best woman I have known, and I had not had the grace even to see it. And now that I saw it, it was gone north in a coach at 7 in the morning, remembering me kindly. And Lady Celia here, the second knowledge came, close upon the first, and worse in its cold way, for the first at least had love in it, and this had nothing. I looked at my courtship of Lady Celia Danvers with my new opened eyes, and I saw it for what it had always been, and I had never let myself see. A transaction, a fitness, an arrangement of estates and consequence with no more of the heart in it than there is in the joining of 2 fields. I had felt, standing at her side, a proprietary satisfaction. I had never felt one moment of what I now felt, sitting alone thinking of a grey-eyed woman in Yorkshire. Everything that Anne had been to me, the ease, the truth-telling, the shared laughter, the sense of being known and liked for myself beneath the rank Lady Celia was not, and could never be. With her I should Duke of Storrington to the end of my days, correctly, handsomely, and never once merely a man. I had been about to marry a woman I did not love and did not know, in a fog of duty and the world's approval, while the woman I did love sat in the same room mending my sentences, and I had thought myself, God forgive me, a sensible fellow settling his affairs. The emptiness of it appalled me. To go on with it now was unthinkable, and yet I was bound to it, or as good as bound, by every tie the world knows how to tie. For it was here, as I rose at last from that cold hearth, with my mind made up as it had never been in my life, that I would go to her. That I would go north and find her, and tell her the whole of it and beg her, past all pride, to have a man who had wronged her by 8 years of blindness. It was here that the obstacles rose up before me in the grey of the morning like a wall, and I saw them all at once, and my heart, that had leapt, went down, for I was not free. I had not honourably ended my courtship of Lady Celia. I had let the whole county understand that I meant to marry her, had danced attendance a season, had all but declared myself, and a man of honour does not turn from such a thing in a night. Nor can he go to one woman with his hand, while the other has cause to think that hand as good as promised her. I could not offer Anne what was not yet cleanly mine to offer, and there was my mother and my sister Sophie, and the whole master expectation of my name and world, which had settled it that I should marry Lady Celia Danvers, and would fall about my ears in astonishment and displeasure at the notion that I meant instead to marry the companion who had just walked out of the back parlour for the world, which had never seen Anne as a woman a duke might love, would see it even less readily than I had. And worst of all, worse than Lady Celia and the world together, there was the plain sickening likelihood that I had understood my own heart too late, that Anne had not gone north in a fit of pique to be fetched home again, but had discharged herself of me for good, deliberately forever, and wanted never to be sought, that she had said her one grey-eyed farewell and meant it to be the last, and that a man who had been too blind to love her when she was near had earned no right to be believed when he came, mortified an 11th hour, to love her when she was gone. I stood in the cold room with the resolve hot in me and every road out of it barred, and knew that I must go to her, and that I had, perhaps, by my own long sleep, already lost her past all going. I went north in the end before I had done any of the things a wiser man or a better one would have done first. I did not go to Lady Celia. I did not seek out her father, nor write the letter that honour and common decency alike required of me, the letter that should have set her free of me cleanly and left my own hand clean to offer where it wished. I told myself 100 plausible things upon the road, that these matters wanted delicacy and could not be dispatched in a morning, that I would settle all upon my return, that first I must know whether there was anything in Yorkshire worth the settling, and every one of these things was a lie dressed as a prudence, and the truth beneath them was simply that I could not wait. I had lain 3 nights awake with the knowledge of my own heart, and a man newly and violently in love is the least governable creature on the earth, being possessed of all a boy's impatience and none of a boy's excuse. So I ordered the horses and went, carrying my dishonour with me unresolved, and persuade myself it was ardour. And it did not once occur to me, rolling north through the wet spring counties with my heart running ahead of the wheels, that to come to one woman while I stood still promised, in the eyes of all the world and of herself, to another was to insult them both at a single stroke, and to insult most of all the very woman I was hastening to win. I had rehearsed upon that journey 100 fine speeches, and had discarded them for finer, and had arrived at last at a serene and dangerous confidence that when the moment came the words would take care of themselves, as they had always taken care of themselves in a life where I had never in my born days had to plead for anything, for a duke does not learn to plead, having only to wish and to be answered. And the great and secret disadvantage of such a life, which I was now to discover in a single afternoon, is that it leaves a man wholly without the arts of the suppliant, without humility, without the patient lowly craft by which ordinary men, who must ask for what they want, learn to ask well. I came to Yorkshire equipped to command and meaning to entreat, and the two things will not change places at a wish. The cousins with whom she had taken refuge were the household of the Reverend Mr. Ashworth, who held a small living in a green fold of country some miles beyond Ripon, a modest parsonage of grey stone with a walled garden and a view of the moor's edge, the whole of it breathing that decent, frugal, well-swept peace that belongs to the houses of good clergymen who have never had money and have never greatly wanted it. Mrs. Ashworth was Anne's cousin, a comely sensible woman some years the elder. There were children. There was the ordinary sweet disorder of a family that loves one another and lives close. I saw all this in the first quarter hour, and I saw more, for I had eyes for nothing but her. I saw that Anne was at home there. That was the first of the day's several wounds, and not the least of them. I had come, I think, half expecting to find her diminished, pining, a displaced and drooping figure whom I had only to appear before to rescue, and instead I found her settled, useful, and serene, moving about that homely house as one who belonged to it, with a child on her knee, and the colour a little better in her face than I had lately seen it, and a look of having laid down some heavy thing and found herself the lighter for it. She had not been withering for want of Storrington. She had been getting well. It is a humbling business to arrive as a rescuer and perceive, within the hour, that no one has sent for you and no one is drowning. I had pictured her, I confess it to my shame, as a thing incomplete away from us, a moon gone dark for one of our particular sun, and here she was shining by a light of her own that I had never guessed she carried. Warm, whole among people who loved her plainly and had no notion that she had ever been anybody's furniture. The children hung upon her. Mrs. Ashworth deferred to her judgment in the small matters of the house, with the unthinking trust of long affection. She had a place here and a worth acknowledged, and the free air of one who is wanted for herself and not for her offices, and I stood in the doorway in my travelling coat and understood that I had come to fetch her out of a happiness better ordered than my own. Nor was I the only gentleman who found the parsonage worth his visiting. There was a Mr. Sedgwick, a neighbour, a man of 35 or so, with a good plain estate of his own 2 miles off, and the unmistakable air of a settled and reasonable happiness. And it did not want any great subtlety to observe, across Mrs. Ashworth's tea-table, that Mr. Sedgwick came often, and that he came for Anne. He was no fool and no coxcomb. He was that most formidable of rivals to a man in my condition, a thoroughly worthy person, quiet, kind, and plainly in earnest, who looked at Anne when she spoke with the frank attention of a man who has made up his mind and sees no reason to be ashamed of it. He had, I gathered from Mrs. Ashworth's artless talk, been 3 times to dine that fortnight, and had taken Anne and the children to see the Abbey ruins, had sent up early strawberries from his own forcing-house. And he did these things not with the flourish of a man laying siege, but with the steady, undemonstrative regularity of a man building something to last, which is a courtship far harder to answer, and far worthier, than any I had ever troubled to conduct. And Anne, though she gave him nothing that a censor could have marked, gave him the ease of long acquaintance and a manifest respect, and smiled at his slow good sense with a quiet in her that I had never had the wit to earn, and I sat and drank my tea and watched, and felt rise in me, hot and ignoble and entirely new, the sensation of jealousy, which I had lived 34 years without and could very well have continued to live without, and which taught me in 10 minutes more of what I had thrown away than all my solitary nights had done. Here plainly was a life she might have, a good plain honourable life within her reach, offered by a man who had seen her whole from the first and prized her for exactly what she was. And I, who had 8 years to do as much and had not, was in no position to grudge it her. And grudged it her with my whole soul notwithstanding, I contrived at last, not without a clumsiness that must have been visible to every soul in the room, to speak with her alone. Mrs. Ashworth, with a kindness I have since had cause to think was mixed with a shrewd cousinly foreboding, made some errand for the others and left us the parlour, and I stood upon the hearth-rug of that little room with the moor light in the window, and the woman I loved standing composed and unhurried before me, her hands folded, waiting to hear what a duke had ridden 200 miles to say. And I said all of it wrong. I hardly know now, telling it, how a man could have contrived to be so much a blunderer with so full a heart, but the heart, I have learned, is no guarantee of the tongue, and mine betrayed me utterly, for I began, God help me, with myself. I told her how it had been at Storrington since she left it. I told her of the empty chair by my mother's fire, and of the flowers that no one arranged rightly any more, and of my mother drooping and aged and sitting alone. I told her how I reached for a counsel a dozen times a day and found it gone, how the days felt unwitnessed, how the whole warmth had gone out of the house with her going. I told her, in short, and with a rising warmth that I mistook for eloquence, the exact and entire catalogue of what her absence had cost me, and I came to the point at the end of it all and asked her, in words I had not so much chosen as let fall, whether she would not come back, whether she would not put an end to all this, whether she would not be my wife and set my house and my heart to rights again. She heard me out. That was Anne. She would not interrupt a man though he hanged himself with every sentence. She stood and listened to the whole of it with her grey eyes steady on my face, and only a certain stillness gathering in her, a certain deepening of quiet warned me, too late, that I had not been saying what I meant to say. When I had done, she was silent a moment, and then she said, in a voice level and low and dreadfully gentle, "You have described to me, your grace, a great inconvenience. I am sorry for it. I did not think when I went away that I should be so much missed. It is a strange thing to learn how large a hole one leaves in the arranging of another person's comfort." And she let that stand a moment, and I felt the ground move under me, for I heard my own speech played back to me in her quiet words and understood, with a slow horror, what had sounded like. "You wish the flowers done again," she said. "You wish your mother's fire built up as she likes it, and her callers turned gently from the door, and your letters mended, and someone at hand who knows how you take your tea, and when you are out of sorts. These are real wants. I do not mock them. But a man does not marry his housekeeper's memories, sir, nor propose wedlock to the ghost of his own convenience. You have not come here for me. You have come here for the want of me, which is another thing entirely, and a thing I will not be." I began to protest, stammering, that she mistook me, that it was herself I wanted, and she stopped me, not sharply, but with a lift of her hand that had more finality in it than any anger. "Do not," she said. "You will only say what will shame us both to remember. Let me speak." Since we are speaking at last, for we never did, in 8 years, and I find I have a great deal to say, and shall likely never have the occasion again. And she looked at me, and for the first time the composure thinned, and I saw beneath it the long-guarded hurt, banked and steady like a coal. "For 8 years, your grace, I was in your house, and in your mother's rooms, and at your elbow near every day of your life, and in all that time you never once saw me. I do not reproach you for it. It is the way of the world, and I knew the way of the world when I entered your service, and I made my peace with it, or thought I had. A woman without face or fortune who earns her bread in a great house learns early that she is furniture, a useful sort of furniture that is spoken to kindly and thanked at Christmas, but furniture that the family walks past without seeing, as you walk past a chair. I was your chair, sir. And now the chair is gone out of the room, and you find the room the worse for it, and you have ridden 200 miles to fetch your chair home. That is not love. That is the discovery in the cold of how warm a thing had been, and I am too proud, having been furniture 8 years, to be promoted to wife on the strength of a draught in the parlour. There was no answering it, for it was true, and the truth of it was so exactly the shape of my own sin that I could only stand and take it. I had thought, in my folly, to overwhelm her, and I found that there is no overwhelming a woman who has spent 8 years learning precisely what she is worth and precisely what she is not, and who will not at this late hour, and for any coronet in England, consent to be valued a penny below the one nor a penny above the other. She was not to be dazzled, for she had lived too near the dazzle to mistake it for warmth. She was not to be flattered, for she had watched me flatter cleverer women than herself and knew the coin was base. She was not to be moved by my rank, which was the one gift I had it wholly in my power to lay at her feet, and which she wanted, of all things in the world, the least. But I was stung past bearing, and a stung man is a stupid one, and I made it worse. I said warmly that she was unjust, that whatever I had failed to see before I saw now with my whole soul, that a man might wake late and yet wake truly. And she looked at me with something that was almost pity, and she said the thing that I had ridden north precisely in order not to hear. "And Lady Celia Danvers," she said, "has she waked too, sir, or does she sleep on in Hampshire, believing herself as good as promised to the Duke of Storrington, while the Duke of Storrington stands in a Yorkshire parlour offering his hand to another woman?" I had no answer. The blood went out of my face, and she saw it, and something in her own face closed like a shutter. "I thought so," she said, very low. "You are not free. You knew you were not free when you set out. You have let a whole county understand you mean to marry her. You have danced her season through. You have as good as declared yourself, and you have not troubled, before galloping here, to lose so much as one knot of it. And you would have me believe I am your heart's one choice, when I am the woman you turn to very instant the grand match lost its savour and left you lonely. No, sir, I will not be the second thought. I will not be the safe, near, convenient creature a great man falls back upon when the brilliant scheme palls and the fine lady tires him. I was ready to be nobody's afterthought before ever I loved you, and I am readier now." She had said it. She had said the word love once in the past tense and by way of a weapon, and it hung in little room and neither of us dared touch it. I saw, in her steadiness, that she had loved me a great while and longer than I could bear to reckon, and had schooled it, and mastered it, and packed it away in a box and taken it north, and I saw that the very depth of it was the reason she would not now be bought cheap. A woman who had loved in silence and asked nothing was not to be had for a duke's belated convenience. Her pride was not vanity, but the last dignity of a heart that had gone 8 years unregarded, and would sooner go unregarded to the grave than be taken up out of habit and loneliness and the failure of a grander plan. And I, who had come to be generous and to raise her up, understood at last that I had nothing she wanted, since the one thing that could have moved her, a love that had chosen her freely for herself, and in the teeth of the world, was the one thing I could not show her, because I had not yet had the courage or the honour to make it true. I did the worst thing then, which was to grow cold in my hurt, and to draw myself up, and to speak, out of shame disguised as dignity, in the very Storrington manner that proved her every word. I said that I was sorry to have troubled her, that I had plainly mistaken both her sentiments and my own welcome, and that I would relieve her of a presence that could only be disagreeable to her, and I bowed, the correct, handsome, finished bow of the Duke of Storrington, the bow I had made her 1,000 times across my mother's drawing-room. And I saw it land on her like a closing door, saw her recognize in it the very furniture and family distance she had described, and saw the last light of anything go quiet in her face. She curtsied. She said she wished me well, and that she hoped, when I had settled my affairs, I should be happy. And it was the same phrase, the same grey-eyed valediction with which she had wished me joy of my marriage in the morning-room at home, and it closed upon me now as it had closed then, gently and forever. I went out to my carriage past Mr. Sedgwick, who was walking up the lane with a spaniel at his heel, and lifted his hat to me with the untroubled courtesy of a man who has nothing to fear from a departing rival, and I got in, and was driven away south through the greening country, further from her than I had been when she left me, and it was my own doing, every mile of it. I had gone north to mend the breach, and had widened it past all mending. I had come to offer love and had offered only my own discomfort. I had had the truth spoken to me plainly by the one person who had never in 8 years told me anything but the truth, and I had answered it with a bow. And I understood going home that a man is never so far from the thing he wants as in the moment he has grasped at it too soon and with an unclean hand. And I did not yet know, though I was soon to learn it, that the worst of it was still before me. I came home to Storrington in the last of a wet April, and the house received me with its accustomed magnificence, and I hated it. There is a particular desolation in returning defeated to a place that has never in its life admitted the possibility of one's defeat. Every marble and every liveried servant seemed to reproach me with an expectation I had betrayed. My mother was in the small saloon where she kept her mornings, and I went to her because I could not help it, because a man of 34 in the extremity of his folly reverts without shame to the one creature who has known him at his worst and loved him through it. And she looked up from her work and saw my face and set the work down, and did not ask me anything at all. She only moved the little embroidered footstool with the toe of her slipper, so that the empty chair beside her, the low chair that had been Anne's these 8 years and stood yet in the exact attitude of Anne's occupancy, as though the room too were keeping her place against her return, was drawn a hand's breadth nearer the fire, and by that small unspeaking gesture, which offered me the seat of the very woman whose loss I had come to mourn, I understood that my mother had read the whole disaster before I had spoken a syllable, and I sat down in Anne's chair like a man sitting down in his own grave, and I told her everything. I concealed nothing, for there was no longer any profit in it, and a man past pride is at least past the small economies of pride. I told her that I loved Anne Weston, that I had known it only when the chair went empty, that I had ridden north like a boy and made my offer like a boor, and that Anne had refused me, not from any want of feeling, for I had seen the feeling and it had undone me, but because I had come to her a man still bound in all but the letter to Lady Celia Danvers, and had asked her, in effect, to be the thing she had sworn before God she would never be. The near and convenient second thought of a great man whose first and brilliant scheme had palled. My mother heard me out with her hands folded and her eyes upon the fire, and when I had done she was silent a long while, and then she said, in a voice from which she had carefully removed all reproach, which was itself the sharpest reproach of all, "You have wronged 2 women at once, Alexander, and the wonder is not that Anne refused you, but that she troubled to tell you why. Most women, so used, would have let you go on in your error and thought it no more than you deserved. That she gave you the truth is the last kindness of a person who has given up expecting anything from you, but has not yet learned to think meanly of you. And if you have any wisdom left in you, which I begin to doubt, you will understand that the first thing love owes her is not another word of love at all." I asked her what, then, love I owed her first, and my mother looked at me steadily and said, "Justice to Lady Celia. You cannot come to Anne clean while another woman in Hampshire believes herself as good as your wife. Go and be honest there before you are anything anywhere, and do it not because it will win you Anne, for I tell you plainly it will not, but because it is right, and because until it is done you are not a man fit to be loved by such a woman as the one you have thrown away." So I went into Hampshire, and I did at last, and too late to be any credit to me, the thing I should have done before ever. I turned my horse's head to the north. I will not pretend the errand was easy, for there is no graceful way for a man to unsay what a whole county has heard him say by every means short of speech. But I found, upon arriving at Danvers Court, that Providence, which had denied me every ease of my own contriving, had prepared me one I had not deserved. For Lady Celia received me alone, at her own quiet request, before her father could descend upon us with his hopes and his settlements, and I had scarcely begun the halting, shamed, and honourable speech had composed upon the road, in which I meant to take the whole blame upon myself and leave her every particle of the dignity, when she stopped me with a lifted hand and a look of such frank relief as I had never thought to see upon the face of a woman I was in the act of releasing. "Your Grace," she said, "I beg you will not distress yourself to find fine reasons. We have neither of us ever been in love with the other, and we have both of us known it, and have both been carried toward this business by our fathers and our fortunes, and the settled expectation of the world, until it wanted more courage to stop than to go on. You have found that courage a little before I did, and I am more grateful to you than I can becomingly say. And she told me then, colouring but composed, that her heart had this 12-month been quietly given to a Mr. Harding, a younger son with a modest living and no expectations, whom she had believed herself bound in duty to renounce, and that in setting her free I had not wounded her but delivered her, and she gave me her hand upon it with a warmth our whole cold courtship had never once produced. I came away from Danvers Court a free man, honestly free, the knot cut clean and no one bleeding of it, and I ought, by every law of romance, to have felt my heart grow lighter with every mile, and instead I felt only the strange flat horror of a man who has at last set his house in order, and knows it has come too late to matter, who has washed his hands and found the water will not reach the stain. For while I had been about my tardy justice in the south, the world had not been idle in the north, and the world, when it stirs, is a filthier engine than any private folly. I do not know to this hour by what channel it began, whether some servant talked, or some Yorkshire neighbour wrote to some London cousin, or whether it rose of itself out of the general appetite of mankind for the degradation of anything fine. But by the time I was home again the thing was abroad and running, and it ran in the ugliest shape it could find. The Duke of Storrington, it was said, had thrown over Lady Celia Danvers, the match of the season, and for what? For nothing, for nobody, for his own mother's paid companion, a Miss Weston without sixpence or family, a woman who had waited at the dowager's elbow and handed her fan, and the wits improved upon it, as wits will, until the story that went the rounds of the clubs and the drawing-rooms was not the story of a duke who had at last learned to love truly, but of a jaded great man amusing himself, in the tedium of his greatness, with a dependent creature in a parsonage, a man who had insulted a lady of rank in order to dangle after a servant, and who would tire of the sport by autumn. I heard it first from Sophie, who came to me white with anger on my behalf and on Anne's, and who repeated to me, because she thought I ought to know the worst, the very phrase that was going about, that the Duke had grown weary of ladies and taken to hiring his loves by the quarter, and I sat and listened and felt that the blood beat in my temples, and understood, with a slow and sickening completeness, that in the very act of loving Anne Weston I had exposed her to a contempt she had done nothing to earn and could do nothing to escape, and that my love, which I had thought the one clean thing I had to give her, had become in the mouth of the world a soil upon her name. There is a cruelty peculiar to the drawing-rooms of the great, which strikes always downward at the defenceless, and which had never in my life touched me because I had always stood above the reach of it, and now I saw it fall, not upon me, whom rank protected as it protects a man from the weather, but upon a woman with no shield of any kind, and I saw that I had lifted the very stone the world was now casting at her. I might have answered a slander aimed at myself with a look, and it would have died. But a slander aimed through me at her I could not answer at all, for every word I spoke in her defence would only feed the fire by proving how much I was concerned in it, and my greatness, that had all my life been a wall between me and consequence, stood now revealed as a thing that could shelter nobody but its owner, and least of all the one creature I would have died to shelter, and it reached her. Of course it reached her. These things always reach the one person they can most deeply wound, travelling with a swiftness that truth never commands. I had it from my mother, who had it in a letter from Mrs. Ashworth, that the talk had found its way even to that green fold of country beyond Ripon, carried thither in the well-meaning gossip of some visiting acquaintance who had thought Anne would wish to know how she was spoken of, and that Anne had received it as such a woman would, without tears and without complaint, but that Mrs. Ashworth had marked how still she had grown, and how she had gone about the house for some days after with the manner of one who has had a long-held fear confirmed rather than a new grief inflicted. For it was, I saw, precisely the thing she had foretold. She had told me in the parsonage parlour, in words I had been too stung to hear rightly, that a duchess drawn up out of a companion would be a scandal and a cruelty to me, and here was the scandal, arrived before ever the duchess did, arrived indeed, because I had done no more than offer, and she, reading it, must have felt not surprise, but the bleak vindication of a wisdom she had bought at the price of her own happiness. She had been right, and being right had cost her everything, and there is no lonelier place in the world than to stand in the ruin of one's life and know that one saw it coming and could not prevent it. I wrote to her. I had sworn to myself, upon my mother's counsel, that I would not press her with more words of love until I had earned the right to speak them. But the news of the gossip broke that resolve as a flood breaks a dam, and I sat down and wrote to her, not a lover's letter, but a plain one, to tell her that I was free, that Lady Celia and I had parted by mutual and friendly consent, and that the lady was herself the happier for it, and that whatever the world was pleased to say, I had loved her and truly and for herself, and would count it the honor of my life to set her above every slander by making her openly my wife. I read it over a dozen times and thought it honest, and it was honest, and I sent it, and I waited for her answer in a suspense that stripped the days to their bare bones. And her answer came in her own upright, unhurried hand, and it was the gentlest and the most final thing that I have ever held in my two hands, and I have it yet, and I could recite it to you in the dark. She thanked me. She was glad, she wrote, truly and without irony glad, that I had done right by Lady Celia, for she had grieved to think of that lady wronged, and it eased her to know the wrong undone, and she was glad too, in her own account, that I should think I had loved her, for it was no small thing to a woman to have been, even in a great man's error, believed worth the loving. But she begged me now, she wrote, for the sake of the very sincerity I professed, to look with her at the plain shape of the thing. I was free, but I was free a fortnight, a month, since I had learned that the woman I first chose was lost to me, and no wisdom in the world could ever untangle, in my own heart or in hers, how much of what I called love was love, and how much was the wound of refusal, the loneliness of the empty chair, the perverse and hungry wanting of the thing withheld. She did not doubt that I believed myself sincere. She doubted, she wrote, only that a man could tell his own heart truly so soon after it had been crossed, and she would not stake the whole remainder of 2 lives upon a feeling that had been born in the hour of my disappointment and might die in the hour of my content. And there was the world besides. She had seen now, she wrote, and I had let her see what it would be, not for a season but for all their years, the whispered parenthesis behind every presentation, the companion who had caught a duke, the servant in the coronet, and she would not bring that upon me, nor upon our children if we had them, nor least of all upon herself, who had spent 8 years learning to live without the world's regard and did not mean, at this late day, to purchase its contempt at the cost of her peace. And then, near the end, very quietly, without flourish, as she said everything, she told me the rest. Mr. Sedgwick had asked her to be his wife. He was a good man, she wrote, and had asked her plainly and for herself, offering her a settled and respected life in a country she had grown to love, among people who thought no ill of her and never would, and she believed she should accept him. She did not love him, she wrote, with the honesty that had never once in 8 years failed her and would not fail her now though it broke me. She did not love him as she had once foolishly and long loved another. But she had learned that a quiet esteem freely given and freely returned was a firmer ground to build a life upon than a great love that came too late and dragged a whole world's scorn behind it, and she meant to build there and be content and grow old useful and unremarkable and safe. And she asked me, as the last thing, as a kindness, as the one gift it now lay in my power to give her, to let her go. To let her go and to wish her well as she had twice wished me, and to believe that in refusing me she was not spurning me but sparing us both, and to find, she prayed I should find, a happiness worthier of my rank and freer of shadow than any she could ever have brought me. She remained, my faithful and grateful servant, Anne Weston, and it was the word servant chosen surely on purpose, laid down at the very foot of the page like a stone upon a grave, that told me she had shut the door and meant it to stay shut. I do not know how long I sat with that letter. The light went out of the window and I did not ring for candles. I had gone north to mend a breach and had torn it wider. I had come home and done at last the one clean and honourable thing left to me, and had been rewarded by watching that very honour twisted into the instrument of her disgrace. I had freed myself of Lady Celia only to lay my freedom, sincere and entire, at Anne's feet, and had it returned to me unopened, not because she doubted its sincerity, but because I had squandered, by my long blindness, the only hour in which sincerity could have been believed. And now there was a good man in Yorkshire with a spaniel at his heel, and an untroubled conscience, who had courted her as I had never had the humility to court anything, slowly and steadily and asking, and who would have her, and give her the peace I had first ignored and then endangered. And she would take him, not in gladness, but in a grave and sensible resignation that was worse to me than any joy could have been, and would live 2 miles from the parsonage and grow old there, and think of me, if she thought of me at all, as the great man who had come too late and gone away, and been, in the end, the occasion of the one ugliness her clean life had ever suffered. I rose at last in the dark and went, I hardly knew why, to the small saloon, and the fire had sunk to nothing, and the room was cold, and there in the grey last of it stood the low chair, Anne's chair. Empty as it had been empty all these months, empty as I now understood it would remain until it was carried up to some attic and forgotten, for she would never sit in it again, nor in any chair of mine. I had spent a whole winter unable to say what that empty chair had cost me. I knew now, to the penny, and I stood over it in the darkness of my own house, a free man, a duke, master of everything a man could wish and of the one thing no man can command, and I could see, look where I would, no road at all by which she might ever be brought back into it. It was my mother who found me there, in the cold dark of the small saloon, standing over the empty chair like a man keeping watch at a bear, and she did not scold me, nor pity me, nor say any of the soft, useless things that people say. But she looked at me for a long while by the light of the candle she had brought, and then she said a thing that turned my whole life upon its hinge. "Alexander," she said, "you have wept over that chair for 6 months, and written 2 letters, and ridden north once, and made a hash of it, and now you propose, I collect, to give her up as a gentleman, and let a good clergyman have her, and to call your surrender a kindness. I have watched you do many wise things in your life, and a great many foolish ones, but I do not think I have ever seen you do a cowardly one until now." I said, stung, that it was not cowardice but respect, that Anne had asked to be let go, and that a man of honour must honour her wish. And my mother set the candle down upon the mantel with a little click that was sharper than any word, and turned upon me the whole clear force of a nature I had spent my life underestimating. "She asked you to let her go," said she, "because she does not believe you want her. She has never in 8 years believed that any good thing was meant for her keeping. She has stood at the edge of every warm room she was ever in and thought herself there on sufferance, and you, who might have taught her otherwise, taught her instead that she was right, by wanting her only when the wanting cost you nothing. Of course she will not believe a letter. A letter is what a great man sends when he cannot be troubled to come. If you mean it, Alexander, if for once in your life you mean a thing all the way to the bottom, you will not write to her again. You will go to her, you will go yourself on your own 2 feet before she stands up in that church and gives her word to another man, and you will say to her face the thing no letter can carry, and if she refuses you then, standing before you and hearing you, then you may come home and grieve. And I will grieve with you, and neither of us will ever speak of it again. But you will not send her a coward's leavings and call it grace. You will go. I went that night. I did not wait for the morning, nor for the roads to dry, nor for any of the 1,000 small permissions that a man of my condition is accustomed to grant himself before he stirs. I called for a horse and I rode out of Storrington into the wet dark with nothing but my mother's blessing and the certainty, arrived at last and arrived whole, that I would rather ruin myself before Anne Weston than preserve myself without her. I had lived 34 years within a great fortress of caution, never moving until the risk was weighed and the retreat secured, and I understood, going out at last unguarded into the rain, that this very prudence had been the disease of my life, the thing that had let me watch a good woman leave a ball at 10 one night and walk home alone in the dark, while I sat on among the candles and never missed her. A man may guard himself so well that he keeps out the one thing worth the keeping. I rode as I'd never ridden in my careful life, spending myself and the beast alike, sleeping 3 hours at a wayside inn with my boots on and my heart going like a hammer, and rising before the grey to ride again. And somewhere in that long northward flight the last of my greatness fell away from me like a wet cloak, and I ceased to be the Duke of Storrington altogether, and became only a man of 34 in the plain and desperate case of loving a woman and having, perhaps, 1 hour left in which to tell her so before she was lost to me forever. I came down into that green fold of country beyond Ripon in the middle of the 4th day, mired to the thigh and grey with sleeplessness and past all care for how I looked. And I did not go to the great house, nor send in my card, nor observe any of the forms, but rode straight to the Ashworth parsonage as a man rides to the one lit window in a dark country. And I flung myself off the horse at the little gate and went up the path, and Mrs. Ashworth, who opened to my knocking, took one look at my face and said nothing at all, but stood aside and pointed toward the small parlour where once before I had made so poor a suit, and there, rising from her chair with her needlework sliding from her lap and all the colour going out of her face, was Anne. She was very still. She did not cry out, nor reproach me, nor ask what I did there. She only stood with one hand at the back of the chair, steadying herself, and looked at me with those grave eyes in which I had learned, too late, to read the weather of a soul, and she said, in a voice held level by main force, "You should not have come. I wrote to you. I asked you." And there she stopped, for I had crossed the little room and taken both her hands, mud and all, before she could finish, and I was past the point where any consideration of decorum could have held me. "You asked me to let you go," I said, "and I have come 4 days to tell you that I will not because I do not honor your wish, but because I have understood at last that your wish is founded upon a lie, and the lie is of my making. And I will not go home and leave it standing between us like a wall. Look at me. I am not the man who came to you in the winter with a proposal in his pocket and a lady half affianced in Hampshire. That man deserved everything you gave him. I am a man who has ridden through 4 days of rain because he could not bear the thought of a world in which you were in it and not beside him, and I have not come to offer you rescue, nor a position, nor the mending of your fortunes, nor any of the things a duke is supposed to bestow. I have come to ask you, as a beggar asks, to take a man who has nothing left that he values except the hope of you." She tried to draw her hands away, and I let them go, for I would not hold her by so much as a finger's weight against her will. But she did not step back, and I took that for leave to go on, and I went on, and I told her the truth all the way to the bottom of it, as my mother had bidden me. "You believe," I said, "that I turned to you because Lady Celia failed me, that my heart, being crossed, snatched at the nearest thing, that what I call love is only the wound of refusal and the cold of an empty hearth, and will die when I am comfortable again. I do not wonder that you believe it, for I gave you every reason. But hear me now, for I have had 6 months to learn my own heart, and I know it at last as I never knew it in the easy years. I did not begin to love you when the chair went empty. I loved you, Anne, through every one of those 8 years, blindly as a man breathes without marking that he breathes. I loved you when I brought my griefs to that low chair, and never asked whose ear I was pouring them into. I loved you when I looked to find you in a room before I knew I was looking. And the empty chair did not make my love. It only tore the bandage off it and showed me the wound that had been there, unfelt my whole life long. Lady Celia was never my rival for you. She was the proof of how little I understood myself, that I could stand up to marry a woman I did not love while the woman I did love handed my mother fan 2 paces off, and I never saw it. I do not offer you the second place, Anne. I never had a first to offer it after. You were the first always, and I was only too great a fool to know the throne was yours." The tears stood in her eyes now, and did not fall, and she said in a whisper the thing I had known she would say, "And the world? You have heard what they say of me. The servant in the coronet. I have made my peace with a small life, Alexander. I cannot make it a second time, if you unmake it now and the world takes its revenge on us both. I will not be the thing they are already calling me." And I answered her, and I felt the whole of my rank rise up in me for the first time, not as a barrier between us, but as a sword I might at last draw in her defence. "Let me tell you what I will do with the world," I said. "I will marry you, Anne Weston, openly at Storrington, before the very people who sneer, with my mother beside me and my name upon you, and the doors of every great house in the kingdom standing open to receive the Duchess of Storrington. And I will let them see, until they are sick of seeing it, that I do not marry you in spite of what you are, but because of it. Because you are the truest and the least self-seeking creature I have ever known, and the world's opinion of you is worth precisely nothing set against my knowledge of you. They say I stoop. Let them. I know, and you shall know, and in time the world itself shall know, that in marrying you I am not stooping but reaching higher than my birth ever set me, and that it is I who am lifted by this match and not you. A slander lives so long as it is left in the dark. I mean to marry you in the full light of day and go on being married to you, contentedly and conspicuously, for 30 years, until the very children of the people who whispered are taught that the great Duchess of Storrington was the wisest choice a proud man ever made. You feared, and told me so, that you would be a scandal to me, but the only scandal I fear is the scandal of my own cowardice, that I should have been given the love of such a woman, and let the chatter of drawing-rooms fright me out of it. I have the power to shelter you at last, Anne. Only give me the right. She stood a long moment, and I watched belief come into her face the way the dawn comes, not all at once but by imperceptible degrees, the dark thinning and thinning until suddenly it is day. And I understood that what she was surrendering, there in that small parlour, was not her prudence merely, but the long armour of 8 years, the settled conviction that no unhoped for good was ever truly meant for her, and that it is a harder thing to lay down that armour than any pride. For a soul grown used to expecting little is more frightened of joy than of sorrow. And then she said, very low, not looking at me but at our 2 hands, which had somehow found each other again, I loved you all those years too. I never meant you to know it. I thought it the one thing I should carry to my grave unspoken. I schooled myself to it every morning, as one schools oneself to a lameness, and told myself that a woman who handed a fan had no business with a heart, and now you tell me I was the throne all the while. And I am so afraid of believing you, for I have taught myself for 8 years that whatever I most wanted was the thing I might least have. And I answered her that she need not find the courage to believe me all at once, but only to let me spend the rest of my life proving it hour by hour, until belief grew upon her whether she willed it or no, and I raised her hands to my lips, mud and needle pricks and all, and I could not speak at all for a while, and when I could, I said only her name, and she came into my arms of her own will, at last, freely chosen and freely choosing. The overlooked companion and the humbled duke, and the long error of 8 years was over. Of Mr. Sedgwick I must speak, for he was a good man, and I will not slight him, and went to him herself the next day, before ever her happiness was published, and told him the whole truth as she told everything, sparing herself nothing, and he heard her out and was silent, and then he said she told me after, that he had known from the first that she did not love him as a wife should, and had asked her none the less because he had thought her friendship a firmer foundation than most marriages were built upon, and because he had loved her quietly himself, but he had rather see her go where her heart truly was than keep her by a promise given in resignation, and that he would not for the world hold her to a lesser life when a greater and a happier one had come to claim her. He bore it, in short, as only a man of real goodness bears the loss of what he wanted, without bitterness and without display. And I, who owed him more than I could becomingly repay, saw to it that within the year the living of a far richer parish fell to Mr. Sedgwick, who accepted it knowing well enough whence the wind blew, and was too large a man to refuse a benefit because he might have grudged the giver. He married, in his own good time, a sensible and warm-hearted woman who valued him as he deserved, and had children, and grew into a contented and much-beloved old age, and when, years afterward, Anne and I dined beneath his roof, I watched the 2 of them talk together with the ease of old friends who have long since forgiven the past its accidents, and I thought that Providence had dealt fairly with him after all, and I was glad. We were married at Storrington in the September of that year, in the full and deliberate light of day, exactly as I had sworn we should be. My mother received Anne into the family with a joy she made no attempt to govern. She had loved her, she confessed, these 8 years, and had watched my blindness with a patience that had more than once nearly failed her, and she took a mischievous, unrepentant satisfaction in the discomfiture of the world. "They will come," she said to me on the morning of the wedding, surveying the swelling ranks of the invited, half of whom had whispered and all of whom now scrambled for their cards, with the dry relish of a general who has outlasted a siege. "They will come, and they will smile, and they will say they always thought her a most superior young woman, and in 2 years there will not be a soul in England who will own to having said a word against her. That is the world, Alexander. it kneels in the end to whatever refuses to be ashamed. You have only to be unashamed long enough, and you have married a woman who was never ashamed of anything in her life but poverty, which is no fault. So you are well matched, and I am content." And Sophie wept, and Anne, who had left a certain ball at 10 o'clock one night years before and told no one, and walked home in the dark believing herself of no account to any living soul, stood up before all that glittering assembly in a plain grace that made every jewel in the room look poor, and became, in the sight of the very people who had sneered, the Duchess of Storrington. And I have never been so proud of anything as I was of the look upon her face when she understood, past all doubting, that she was loved. I have kept all these years the low chair. It stands now as it stood then, beside my own at every table where I sit, and Anne fills it, and has filled it for the better part of my life. And our children grew up thinking nothing more natural than that their mother should have her seat drawn close to their father's, and never knew, until they were old enough to be told. What a long and dark and foolish road that small nearness had cost. I am an old man now, or nearly, and I have had time to consider what it was that saved me, and I have concluded that it was the emptiness itself. For I was a man who had everything, and everything had taught me nothing. It was the one absence, the small vacant chair beside the fire that I could not explain away nor fill with any substitute, that at last taught a blind man to see. I had been rich in all things and poor in the only thing, and had not known my own poverty until the single good was gone. And I have thought, in the long contented evenings since, that a man may be schooled by his fortunes and remain a fool, and be schooled by his losses and be saved. She left a ball at 10 one night and told no one, and I did not so much as mark that she was gone, and it took the going and the emptiness and 6 months in the cold to teach me what I ought to have known at the first hour, that out of all the treasures heaped upon me by my birth and my rank and my undeserving luck, she was the one irreplaceable good, the single thing that could not be commanded nor purchased nor supplied. And so I have never since let that particular seat at any table of mine stand empty beside me, for I know now, as only the once blind can ever truly know, what an empty chair may mean, and what it may cost a man to learn it, and I look up and she is there, and I am the richest man that ever lived.